2, 4, 5. But if I go full screen, I have 5. But
Okay,
you
I
just
got
scroll
1, 2,
down.
3. 1, 2,
Oh, hi, Patrick.
4, 5.
Hey. Okay, how did
now
you get? I don't have Patrick.
Well, now I have Patrick and not Casey.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So I don't think I can get everybody.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
I lost Casey for Patrick too. I don't know. It's a 6 and 1/2 dozen the other, I guess.
Yeah. I said live streaming on Facebook. I meant YouTube. So I see it's popped up that it is.
Yeah. Come on, Pat. Get with your terms there, eh? Get with the new reality.
I need some coaching from you, Rick.
I'll be right over. Oh, no, I can't. Got to keep, I'm self-isolating. Sorry. Can't make it.
Okay, y'all, we are live streaming to YouTube as well as recording, and we are ready to start your worship when you are ready.
Okay, welcome to the special meeting of council electronically via Zoom, May 26, 2020, time 4:43 p.m. Meeting called to order, and we'll have a moment of silence. Approval of the agenda.
I have a motion moved by Patrick Adams, seconded by Eugene Ivanov. Be it resolved that the agenda for the special meeting of council held on May 26, 2020, beginning at 4:40 p.m. be approved as circulated to all members of council.
All in favor? Motion carried. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest? Councillor Owen?
Yeah, I have a declaration of pecuniary interest on the discussion about the proposed budget for the wastewater and water department. As my son and wife both work in the water department.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you, Councillor Owen. Reports of municipal officers and communications. Item 4.1, proposed 2020 annual budget report and presentation. Treasurer Keith Gorman.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to council. Welcome everyone this evening. Thank you for joining my fellow colleagues and I tonight in our presentation of our first version of the 2020 annual budget. For purposes of this presentation, we've kept materials very high level. However, if required, we can drill into greater detail as needed and if desired. Just before we get into the actual slide deck, we did make a couple small amendments this afternoon to the slides, one of which was slide 18, where we had actually had the wrong graph. So I had accidentally copied over the previous slide's graph. So that's been updated. And then slides 20 and 21, where we've just updated the verbiage for TPR. So before we get into talking to the particulars around the annual budget, I thought it would be best that we just touch base on a couple of areas. It's throughout the slides, you'll hear us referencing operations or operating, capital, and that kind of thing. And it's just to distinguish between the two types of expenditures you're going to see within. So when we're thinking of our operating expenditures, we're thinking routine expenditures and revenues that are essentially associated with the day-to-day delivery of municipal services. For all intents and purposes, we've tried to group them by areas of responsibility. In some instances, I apologize in advance, we may have referred to it as transportation services or public works interchangeably. It's something that we are working towards standardizing, and we'll get better with time. But if ever I refer to transportation services, it's one and the same as public works. Similarly, if we talk about corporate services, we're talking about general administration, and we'll be sure to try to align those things a bit better as we go forward. When we're looking at the operating costs, I think it's important to stress that it's a blend of controllable and sometimes not so controllable costs. So those that we can manage within our departments, and then there are services that we basically contribute to within the region that we don't have a lot of direct influence over. When we're looking at capital, and we won't touch too much on capital tonight unless warranted or requested, but we're talking significant expenditures for the corporation that'll benefit it long-term in nature. So typically at least a year of useful life or beyond, typically significant expenditures. And those are the types of things that we would fund through various sources, whether they be grants, reserves, levy, or debt. We do take a little bit of a look into the water and wastewater budget. When we're talking to those two particular budgets, it's costs associated with water treatment and distribution, as well as wastewater collection and treatment. For all intents and purposes, we've applied best practices, which would be they would be funded fully by user rates. And when we touch on reserves and reserve funds, it's just a reminder that reserves are the accumulation of prior surpluses, which are something that we can allocate at your discretion, whereas reserve funds are segregated and there's more restrictions on the use. Before we get into the particulars of it, I just wanted to bring everybody up to speed on some of the challenges we faced as a team as we were going through this. In particular, the obvious one, COVID-19. The pandemic has influenced some of the revenues that we put forth. We've sat down as departments and tried to assess that impact. And I think it's important that we can't stress enough in this case that we've estimated the losses based on what we know to this point in time and what we anticipate, given where we're at today with it. It's our best estimate at this time, and obviously should this continue on for a greater length, it could have some bearing on the revenues going forward. When we get into the particulars with different departments, they'll probably touch on a little bit of the lost revenues associated with it. And then looking at some of the other challenges with 2019. In some instances, we saw things where we didn't quite get to what we intended to in 2019. We've had to budget for it in 2020. As always, we're faced with gaps in levels of desired service. So in some instances, we've established a prior level that, may be high. And in other instances, we've had noted gaps that we need to improve upon. Existing obligations that can create draws on our resources. That's not to say that past decisions are correct or incorrect or wrong, but we just want to make sure everybody understands the implications associated with debt. And that's why we exercised so much caution when we were reviewing our capital projects. And basically are saying, before we enter in, it's good to understand that broader scope and picture. And then lastly here, I would speak just about the systems and processes. We do have an ERP system, but it's big and it's cumbersome. And it makes it challenging for the management team to really get a good handle on their costs, particularly in some significant areas like labor. So, sorry, Rick. An ERP system is basically our financial system. It's VATM, and it's cumbersome, and it makes it a bit challenging for everybody to understand. So when we sat down to do departmental budgets, in some instances, they were tasked with going through thousands of lines, basically, of expenditures. And sometimes because you're so narrowly focused, you're missing the bigger, broader picture because you're honed in on all these specifics. So it's something we've identified and we intend to address. We've done some cleanup over the course of January to try to reduce consolidated structures, but it did create challenges sort of in some of the comparatives. So for the purposes of the presentation, we've tried to group like items in similar buckets. So if we've closed off old historical material accounts, we've lumped them in with materials and supplies to try to get a fair representative comparative for purposes tonight. As far as capital, again, I don't want to go too much into detail because we did spend significant time on it. But obviously the delay of 2019 projects are impacting 2020, and then the ongoing aging infrastructure and the big projects we're about to embark on. So it is contributing to that overall draw of $6 million that we put forward previously. This next slide, quite simple in nature, but it really puts the size and scope of our operations in perspective. I think it's important to really note, given the size of the organization, how critical it is to have appropriate resources and systems in place to effectively manage this level of responsibility. Quite honest, when I came in, I didn't actually realize that we were up to, 35 to $37 million cumulative spend when we went across all of the areas, because we segregate them into different respective budgets. So we basically put them into their own little silos. And when you look at it on the cumulative, it's quite substantial in nature, and it warrants a great deal of responsibility. And obviously the oversight and systems are critical in making sure we're effectively utilizing the size and scope of the operation. If any time you guys want to jump in, I should have said this at the start, feel free, but I'll just try to walk you through, and like I said, speak up if there's a question. Don't hesitate, and fellow members of the senior team, speak up if there's anything you want to add. So briefly looking at our cash sources and uses, essentially that $37 million we spoke to, really we're driven by our requirements. And in this case, more than 2/3 is tied to operations. We have the previously identified $6 million in capital, and then effectively for water, wastewater, we need about $4.6 million. And how do we intend to raise that $37 million? Largely on the side of operations. The presentation tonight will focus a lot more on those particulars, but we do have other sources of revenues as well that we try to draw upon. Capital funding, so grants that we go attempt to secure, and some of which have been secured and others that are still pending. Wastewater and water fees. That big slice of the pie on the left, the operation side, that's primarily our tax base. It's our departmental revenues when we work through different areas of the organization, so recreation user fees that we have within the administration, money that we draw for the museum or similar. And so we will touch a lot more into those. But as you can see far and away, operations eat up the lion's share of our costs, and they are the lion's share of our revenues. So looking at our cash operating sources, essentially we start with sort of a baseline. What grants do we anticipate? So in this case, we have the ONPF, which comes in, the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, for about $6.2 million every year. From there, the departments basically sat down and they assessed their user fees and anticipated revenues. We also added in other areas or other types of revenues that we draw within the corporation. So interest income, that might be on investments that we have or hold, or our cash position, monies from the Provincial Offences Act, etc. In particular, on those other revenues, we did forecast or estimate lower revenues in those areas. On the side of interest, the expectation that we're going to actually utilize cash this year, proceed with those capital projects, unlike last year, where we sat on a larger cash position than usual. For the provincial offenses, we did go very conservative this year on the basis of our Q4 2019 amounts. So it came in at half of sort of what we had previously seen and anticipated. And we thought it would be better to be very conservative in this nature and not count on it. And given everything going on with the COVID pandemic, I think it's safe to assume there's going to be a slowdown on court processing and that kind of thing as well. Other areas that we draw revenues from are penalties and interests, and those are slightly lower as well year over year. It's partially attributable to the impact of waiving interest and penalties for the period to help our tax base. So we have adjusted and taken that out. And then ultimately, once we've got a picture, we know what it costs to sort of run the operation, and we take into account all of these other revenue sources, we basically land at how much we need to raise based on tax dollars. And so we basically work into a tax amount that's required. And so over to the right, if you just look quickly, it's basically slightly behind last year, slightly above last year's budget. So we wanted to look at some of those key areas within the operating revenues. Some of the areas where we're delving high and deviating low. This would be the main aspects or components of that operating revenue piece. So our grants, right now we're in the budget at $6.6 million. Now last year, at this point in time, we would have secured closing in on $6.9 million. The big difference here is that modernization monies that we received last year. It was one time. When we're looking here, we've got $6.2 million for ONPF, that's been confirmed. And then we've also penciled in some dollars on the expectation that it's likely that we will see some sort of funding or assistance related to COVID in light of the challenges faced. To be safe, the monies that we've earmarked or anticipated are all going into a reserve fund, just in case they don't come to fruition. On the departmental revenue side of things, as you can see, we're forecasting lower revenues, and we'll touch on those far more when we get into the departments. But the big challenge here is, we've lost a good chunk of the year in a couple of key areas, in places where we had significant user fees, such as the complex. And then lastly, on the taxation side, this sort of shows you the uptick year over year. So basically, when we're looking at the taxes levied, we started at a baseline of $10.8 million, which would have been what was raised last year through interim and final billings. From there, we basically started with the CPI, so Consumer Price Index, increase of 2.2%. The intent of the CPI index is really, exactly that. It's recognition in the fact that things cost more, whether it be fuel, supplies, materials. And so we aligned it with CPI, and we basically were able to raise about $250,000 from that increase over the 10.8 we saw in 2019. And then the other aspect to get that extra, the revenue, is on the growth side of things. And so it's all other things that held consistent, rates and everything else. The growth within the municipality, within the assessed values, basically put us at $700,000 additional. So once we came up with what we require via the tax base, we basically took that scenario to our tax collector. We had him run a couple calculations. So we basically ran at 10.8 and we ran at the levy requirement of revenue. And he basically ran a revenue neutral calculation. And what that does is essentially keeps the distribution across the various classes consistent. And then we try to parallel to the average citizen within Kirkland Lake and the residential tax base. Residential is critical here because it is such a large contributor to our tax base. It's far and away the most significant thing. And so upon plugging in, running scenarios through Opta, we basically, on a $100,000 assessment, we're seeing a $66 increase year over year. We think that the $100,000 example is pretty appropriate. When we pulled our data out of Opta, it turned out that the average residential assessment in 2020 is $103,800. So looking at other cash sources, on top of the taxation revenue we previously talked about, we have water, wastewater. And the whole intent there is to recoup any costs, put some money into reserves for future improvements. Here we have the 2% increase that had been approved to start the year. We held everything else constant. And we think that we were comfortable at that 2% increase that was previously approved. As far as capital funding, as I mentioned, we have monies from OSIF, the Ontario Communities Infrastructure Fund, gas tax, and those are grants that we see basically, continuously year over year. And then we have other various grants that we're relying on to fund our capital this year. And of those, the vast majority of them are secured and previously approved. So that's those provincial and federal fundings on those big projects that we're looking at, SWAS decommissioning in particular. And then we have some reserve fund transfers that are coming out. Between operations and capital, we are drawing from that revenue structure. And then we did, in the prior council meeting on the 12th, utilize some of that surplus in particular to help pick off some of the smaller amounts and fund them. So looking at our operating expenditures, far and away, like I said, the biggest expense we see, very consistent with what we've historically seen last year. So we're within 1% of actuals, within 2% of budget. Within the departments, we've given you sort of a quick breakout. And when I say departmental, I think of our big service areas, our recreation and cultural services, our general government, our public works or transportation services. And that's what I'm referring to when I talk about the cumulative departmental expenditures. And then other expenditures, what we're looking at are sort of those ones that are a little more outside of our control per se. So monies that we would contribute to partners within the region, whether they be DSAT, Temiskaming Health Unit, or similar type things. And those again are largely consistent. In that other expenditures bucket, we do include tax write-offs and payments to MPAC. I think if you were going to look and sort of compare to prior years, that's probably one of the biggest changes, as we've isolated those pieces outside of Treasury and brought them in to their own separate line items. We're talking tax write-offs. So from a service area perspective, and I don't want to get into too much of the details because the managers are going to speak briefly to them as well. But I think what you see here is sort of the consistency across basically all operating areas. We have some instances where we're delving high and we're jumping a little bit above, and other instances where we're basically very consistent. But for all intensive purposes, these are sort of those service areas that we're focused in on tonight. Community services, development services, general government, protective services, which would be encompassing fire and police, public works, and then TPR. I think if you would, that's sort of the 6 branches of how we sort of see the operation. But as you can see, all relatively consistent year over year. I'll turn it over to Bonnie, who's going to speak briefly about community services. And then, as previously mentioned, if there's more details that are desired, I know there was some reading materials that were previously provided as well. Don't hesitate. We'll try to assist. And if we don't have the answer tonight, we'll come back with a proper one and distribute out amongst. But like I said, it's up to you guys sort of how deep into these things we want to go. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Ms. Sackrider.
Thank you, Mr. Gorman. Your worship to council. From a high-level perspective in community services, the most significant changes that you will see are due to closures of facilities due to COVID. For example, we're anticipating approximately $200,000 less in recreation revenue than if we were not closed. Facilities have reduced their operating costs in accordance with the closures, and we have also removed as many discretionary costs as possible due to the increased or decreased revenues. Other than these reductions, expenditures are fairly consistent year over year, with increases primarily driven by increases in utilities, insurance, and wages. Ms. Bilodeau, Mr. Haas, and I are all present if you have any questions on the community services budget.
I have a question, Pat.
Councillor Adams.
Through your worship to Bonnie. So we're going to see a decrease of $200,000 in revenue. At what part of the timeline in 2020 is there going to be, did we budget to see possible revenue for 2020?
What timeline are we anticipating?
Yeah.
So what we've done is we've basically, depending on what area the revenue comes in, whether it's outdoor or indoor, because those places are opening at different levels, we're anticipating that we will be closed for either a quarter or a third of the year. So we're looking at late summer openings of facility or early fall for outdoor spaces, because team sports are a revenue generator, but we still aren't able to operate those. We are basically anticipating no outdoor revenue from team sports this year.
And then for the pool, what is the expected timeline to be making revenue on that for the budget?
Well, I wish I had my crystal ball and I don't even want to say the words because I don't want anyone to hold us to it. So we did this budget based on fall reopening, and we also reduced our numbers because we aren't confident that we will be able to open in the same structure that we have in the past. We may not be able to have as many people in the building at one time.
No, thank you very much, Bonnie.
You're welcome. Is there any other questions for community services at this time?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sackrider. As Bonnie touched on, we looked at different areas. You know, they did also decrease their costs. So Bonnie did go through, we saw some significant savings on chemicals, labor costs, and that kind of thing. Not enough to offset, obviously, the $200,000 that we forecasted in a drop in revenues, but an honest effort was taken on this one in particular. There was a fantastic job in redeploying staff, and this would be probably the biggest savings we've also seen associated with COVID on a cost perspective side of things. But outside of the recreation center in particular with COVID, the library and the museum are relatively consistent year over year. Heritage North seeing big savings, obviously, with the payout of that loan year over year. Heritage North obviously seen some challenges. When we look at the revenue side of things, they're basically forecasting revenues in the November-December timeframe as well. So basically, no revenues coming through until the better part of the last quarter of the year. With that, we'll turn it over to Ms. Bilodeau, who can speak or take the lead, if you will, on development services.
Thank you, Mr. Berman. Through you to council, your worship. Development services, there's a few things that have changed this year. These departments do include planning, building, waste management, economic development, bylaw, and animal control. So we do have some things to kind of overarchingly mention. Our engineering department, you'll notice if you go through the package that there is no engineering expenses. A lot of that has been pushed either through my budget or Ms. Riverty's budget. So you do see some increases such as the ESRI, our CGIS account, our ESRI program, and our AutoCAD. That is in my budget, and there's also some expenses like contracted services that are affecting Mr. Riverty's budget. So added expenses that weren't technically there before. We also have the new building inspector position that we budgeted for. We have the contracted services that we're currently using in buildings. So you see a little bit of a jump in those. We did see a little bit of a slowdown with construction and permitting with COVID, although now that the restrictions are up, there's lots of people that are coming in and inquiring. So we should see some of those revenues start to trickle back in. We also have our zoning update project, which is that $22,000 project that is about to get started. We were waiting a little bit to see whether or not we can get some of the restrictions off on public meetings, just to make sure that we're getting that openness and transparency that is needed to properly and effectively do that task. We also, as you may recall, have a appeal that's outstanding with Netty Lake. So there is some legal costs that are attributed in this budget as well for that. There's also, for the waste management side of things, we did want to emphasize that there's a need to purchase additional waste carts. That's driving the costs up a little bit there. I think it's up by about $25,000 in order to purchase those and replace some of the ones that are on the street that are either broken or are needing repair. We're all out of carts at this point, so it's time to buy a few more. Other than that, everything else is status quo, and I am available for any questions, and I believe Mr. Haas will explain the economic development budget.
Councillor Adams?
Yes, through your worship to Ashley, with the no more engineering, I guess it has to come from council, but is it possible to get how much was spent on contracted engineering for this year, since this is our first year doing this? It's part of the Plan Do Assess Act.
Through you to council, yes, of course, we can get that number to you coming. I don't have it right off the top of my head, but
Oh no.
get that for you.
At the end of the year, of course. Thank you.
Your worship.
Yes, Councillor Owen.
Yeah, through you to Ashley. These waste carts we're having to buy, why is that? Because they're nowhere near the end of their life cycle. We shouldn't be having to replace them at this point. What's the problem?
So there are some waste bins that need to be, so there's a wait list of people who are actually looking to have a new waste cart. Some have been either damaged or just need replacement. What happened was we originally budgeted and purchased waste carts for residential only with the intent that we would not be picking up commercial waste. So we had originally budgeted for surplus to take into account for future replacements, but now that we've distributed a lot of them to the commercial establishments, because we've kept that mandate of picking up commercial, we don't have the extras to be able to replace the ones that are broken. We also have people who have built new homes that need waste carts, or businesses that are opening that need waste carts. So we're having to supply them with those carts as well.
But is that not a cost neutral process? Do they not buy the waste bins?
Through your worship, no, they do not. This is something that we do through tax.
Commercial does not buy the waste bins?
No.
Okay, thank you.
If I may comment, Ms. Bilodeau, some of them, the additional waste bins were for apartment buildings that had a number of more than 5 or 6 units. We were a little bit flexible there, and some of the not-for-profit organizations, I'll use the Salvation Army as an example, that we, not that we were kind, but we were very reasonable in trying to help them out as well. So that did use up, I don't know the number, but I wouldn't doubt we're talking 30 or 40 easily. Does that sound fair?
Yes, your worship, there was some handed out to apartment units and not-for-profits as well.
Okay, thank you. No further questions?
Okay,
Mr. Haas?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, Your Worship, to Council. The economic development budget encompasses both economic development and tourism. They are tracked separately for Council's benefit. The major items in the 2020 budget encompass the Roscoe loan. You will see that for roughly $117,000. That encompasses interest, principal, as well as, just interest and principal. There is a line item in the budget for consultants. That should be noted that is dependent on receiving government funding. Usually we get 90%. So the municipality's share from the levy would be about $14,600. If there is no government funding, then we would not be spending that money unless otherwise directed by council. And we would find other ways to do that kind of work. Areas that would be encompassed by that would be a partnership with local economic development agencies for a stronger COVID business recovery and response initiative, as well as employee recruitment and retention initiative to try to get people to support our local businesses in attracting employees in the future. Those are basically the major items. In terms of tourism, mostly Kirkland Lake has benefited from event tourism that was run through the Festivals Committee and other community groups. Obviously, that is down and out this year. However, some other tourism may be back as we look towards the end of the year, particularly sledding, snowmobiling. And we do have a partnership with regional organizations and other municipalities to promote Kirkland Lake in that regard. We do have one of the longer seasons. So there is dollars set aside for that. I think that should be it, sir.
Councillor Adams?
Yes, through your worship to Mr. Haas. For the economic development for revenues, we're budgeting for 70,000 and 2019 actual was 52. So the user fees, would that be like hall rentals and like visiting the museum? Just curiosity.
No, sir. The user fee terminology is just one that's been standardized across the corporation for its reporting purposes. User fees, I'm just checking my notes. If you give me one moment, please.
Yeah.
that would be your 70,000 from.
That's right. Sorry. Sorry, Keith. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. That's, I was just trying to help you out. Take it
Yep.
right from your notes. So that would be that the monies from, I believe, Econ that were supposed to have been received last year that came forward into 2020.
For a bit of history on that, in 2018, we held an RFP for harvesting on municipal land. Ecom Forestry did secure that contract, and they did the cutting at a price of $70,000 to the community. And that was realized today or this year, and that is what's accounted for in the user fees.
Well, that 70,000, that's pretty much what we have in our community improvement plan fund. That's where it was directed to.
Actually, sir, I'd like to point out that on June, I believe it's the first meeting in June, we're bringing forward a report that summarizes all the harvesting activity that took place and asks for some direction. The money that was allocated by council towards a community improvement plan was a second part of the cut. It was roughly $35,000. There's a $70,000 amount that was from the primary cut. Our report to council is recommending that it be also allocated appropriately towards the CIP. I should point out that within the economic development budget as well, there is the community grants at $25,000. That is not a new item, but we did pass the policy on that in 2019, so it's a slightly restructured program.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Haas. If we can jump over to the next slide, I guess we'll call upon myself. General government. And so in this case, we're looking at areas such as mayor and council, general administration, which would be the office of the CAO, the clerk, treasury, which would include taxation, HR, health and safety, and then management information systems. As you can see on the revenue side of things, relatively consistent year over year. And on the costing side of things, a bit more challenging when you look at it. When we're looking at the costs, in particular, labor is one where we're seeing an uptick. It's not that there's necessarily additional positions. I think it's more of a nature of how we budgeted or the gaps we had previously. So for instance, if we were to look at the general admin bucket, in 2020, we've got some overlap with Joanne being here for part of the year and her replacement, Megan. We have Rick in, with as you know, a full permanent position, whereas in 2019, we had allocated a portion of the acting CAO's wages to here, while the lion's share of their wages still remain in their paying cost center. So it is creating some big swings in particular on that labor side of things. So when we look at HR, labor costs are also jumping up year over year. And what this is it's a benefits clerk position that wasn't originally budgeted in 2019, and I believe was added late in the year in and around November. And so we have budgeted for that position to remain for 2020 as a support person to human resources. We've also flagged it to be a backup for payroll, which is one of those critical risk areas that we don't necessarily have a long-term succession plan over. I think one thing that I should just note is when we're looking at this particular slide, it's not including...
Excuse me, Treasurer Gorman. Councillor Owen has a question.
Actually, I have a few concerning the budget for mayor and council, which comes under the general government here. We did a wage freeze again this year, and according to the figures here, we're spending $5,000 more. And for materials and supplies for council, it went from $403 last year to $7,650 this year. And administration and other went from $9,028 to $14,898. I know as a counselor, I have not increased my expenses. I haven't gotten more materials. I don't understand how the administration has jumped so high for council. I haven't seen any big changes in the way the administration is taking place. So I wondered if I could get an explanation on those things.
Yes, of course. So, Megan, do you want to speak up, or would you like me to try to?
Between Keith and I, we can answer. Just trying to pull up the budget in front of myself here. I know in terms of for council monies, I did allocate a little bit extra for training, conferences, and materials, just for hoping to attend more conferences or possibly having a trainer come in-house, as well as for more materials for printing costs of the agendas.
In regards to the materials and supplies, I think the biggest change there is the assumption that we're going to be utilizing the agenda software. So we did earmark some funds for upgraded technology.
Sorry, Keith, I can't hear you.
Sorry, Rick, or sorry, Councillor Owen. On the $7,000 swing in materials and supplies, we did earmark some funds for some upgraded technologies. We're looking at implementing an agenda software package, which would work with iPads, and we basically did budget funds for such. The monies that we've budgeted in the $7,000 would come from the modernization and efficiency reserves. In regards to the labor, it won't be perfect from year to year, but essentially what we've done is I took a quick look through the payroll. One change that we'll see is on the benefit side of things. We have changed costs on that kind of thing. I've tried to estimate which councillors would be drawing on health benefits, which wouldn't. So there will be some variability there. I'm not surprised to see it deviate just slightly, but as far as compensation rates and everything else, they were all held consistent with what was passed. So I would suspect it's more on the burden side of things.
And the admin and other jumping from 9,000 to 14,000?
I think that's the piece that Megan in particular was speaking to. We've lumped travel and training within the admin and other. And I believe it was at the AMO conference that we had budgeted to have several members of council attend.
Yes.
And the big jump in materials and supplies is got to do with the agenda?
Agenda software and technology to basically utilize it. So we'd put iPads out to each member of council.
Well, I don't know. I'm doing fine with the agendas the way they're printed. I'm not sure that I would even use an iPad. I'm just concerned that we're spending money on this, and I just don't get it.
I think in this case, it's part of that modernization thing and the efficiency funds. We see it as an opportunity to streamline some things, but obviously we're receptive to some changes if required.
Well, I'll just go with the flow. I just
Yeah,
was
this is
surprised by
one.
the numbers. That's all. I just wanted an explanation. I'm not being critical of staff. I just I couldn't figure it out for myself. So thank you.
Not at all. And if I can just sort of share just a bit of my philosophies, that modernization and efficiency money in particular, you know, the intent behind that is to help bring us up a little bit forward. You know, being new to the organization, we've seen some challenges, in particular around the technologies and stuff that we're using here. And sometimes we can refine our processes and improve our end product by looking at these things. And, you know, it looks like an outflow of expenditures, but the time savings in particular for some of the members of the team will well pay for itself, I'm sure.
Does general administration, is that also part of this general government?
Yes, so general government also includes your general administration.
Again, admin and others jumped from 67,000 to 112, 423,000.
So what we can do there, just bear with me, I'm going to try something. So general government. It's just tricky because it's kind of cut off on our screen, so we can't quite see, but can you see the visual that's up on the screen?
Yeah.
So basically what we've got here is we've got our budget within general admin.
Mm-hmm.
We have our 2019 actuals, and then we have what we budgeted in 2019. And so as I was speaking just quickly, the biggest change far and away is labor. But your concern was admin and other.
Well, I think the labor I understand is, so I'm asking about
Yeah,
the another, yeah.
So we did see a noted increase on insurance. So we're about 11% higher year over year. And that's carried across to all departments. As
Was
far
that,
as,
sorry,
sorry.
Keith, didn't mean to shut you off, but I can't
No,
see you, so it's hard.
yeah,
Is that because of claims we made, or is that just the industry thing?
I would
That's
tend to think more industry than anything.
okay.
It's something that we've earmarked and said that we would like to have them come in and do a presentation.
Okay.
Going forward, it's, I think right now we sort of have an oversight on the last year. And it's something that we want to actually maybe look at and consider for tender going forward and having actual presentations, given the size and scope of the account. So it's something that we did flag for the end of 2020. Outside of the insurance uptick of 10%, as you can see, we have earmarked some monies for legal. We didn't see a lot of monies historically within that. We didn't feel that we needed quite the budget that we had in the prior year, but we do have that placeholder. Jumping down just quickly, subscriptions would include that agenda software. Advertising, I mean, we're talking overall about $11,000 that's been budgeted for it. Part of this would have been in relation to COVID. We've penciled in some monies. And then Megan has seen some funeral expenses come through at higher rates than we've historically seen, so she's earmarked some funds for that as well. So it's a whole sort of hodgepodge of different things that are really pushing up that particular bucket.
Okay, thank you, Keith. I appreciate that.
No problem, thank you.
Treasurer Gorman, can I ask a question? When we have like a slip and fall claim, does our insurance have a deductible clause? It seems to me it was something like $10,000, and often it's cheaper for us to pay the 10,000 or under 10,000 claim ourselves rather than going through the insurance. And I don't know if there's been an increase in, I just use that as an example of slip and fall, but in general liability claims or stuff like that. Is that a fair comment, or is that we're not having that many instances? I know insurance has gone up, there's no question about that.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's Rick McGee, through you to Council. So one of the fastest increasing areas of claim are no doubt slip and falls, especially with all of the accident injury lawyers that you hear advertising on the radio. But we can advise that any claims are reviewed by an adjuster. Any claims are reported to the insurance company to determine the best course of action going forward. And staff vigilantly and diligently assesses every claim based upon the circumstances and the merits. And I would suggest, Your Worship, that we wouldn't easily pay any claim whatsoever. That would just create more claims coming the town's way, but they are adjudicated in a very consistent and professional fashion to ensure that the town does the proper and correct thing every time relating to insurance.
Yeah, I'm satisfied. Some of these are nuisance claims, and we're not going to write off or write up a check for 10,000 to ask them to disappear. So I'm confident that our administration is following things through and going the insurance route as far as administration and investigating claims. So I just was curious, is our deductible 10,000?
I believe it is 10,000. I'll go back and just confirm.
Okay.
But to that effect, we have seen instances where we've paid out directly rather than go to the claim base and pay deductible if favorable for the municipality.
And in a circumstance like that, Your Worship, that would be in a clear-cut case where the municipality has had an accident, for instance, a snow plowing event where perhaps a vehicle was inadvertently clipped and there's no need to involve the insurance company in something that may be a very expedient body repair at a very small amount. And, staff is certainly remorseful for the circumstances, but anybody who's ever been in a snowplow, our people have a very challenging job, and the more vehicles that are off the street, the easier it is for everybody.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you.
The mayor?
Councillor Adams.
Yes, my question would be for contracted services for the integrity commissioner for $40,000. So for 2019, $5,000 was spent. So that $40,000, unless we are to all go full Elliott Lake on each other, I think some of that money can probably go towards iPads, especially helping with moving forward with technology. Recommendation.
Okay. Well, thank you, Councillor Adams. We can make note on that one. It was just an estimate based on the prior year, and we can assess.
And also, Your Worship, through you to council, we do have a current case ongoing right now, which the clerk has received invoicing for. And that invoicing for that particular case exceeds what the 2019 value was.
Ugh.
So we wouldn't want to give council a false sense of security that we're going to be in and around the $5,000 mark. I would suggest you're probably going to be in excess with the cases to this point for 2020 between $20,000 and $40,000. And the clerk may wish to comment as well.
A very good point, Rick, because I see in Collingwood, they're having an Ontario provincial investigation, and the bill's up over $5 million right now. So things can get pretty hairy out there. So I don't want to leave ourselves short either. We might be, obviously, looks a little high, but I mean, we have alternatives, as Councillor Adams says. If we don't spend that, we can reroute that for some other purchases that we may need.
And through you, Your Worship, to council as well, we are planning to post our RFP for an integrity commissioner, so their services might be at a different cost than our current integrity commissioner.
Yeah. So there's that unknown factor. I agree.
Sorry.
Councillor White.
So the last time we had an integrity commissioner complaint, we didn't get invoiced until the complaint was completed and submitted to us. So this time they're charging ahead of time?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to council, I would suggest that it is the appropriate thing to do to invoice as a case proceeds. And Mr. Gorman is nodding his head affirmatively. From a cash basis and accrual basis of accounting, we would like to know those costs as they're incurred in the year in which they are incurred. So we're happy with being invoiced at the time. We may not be happy with the costs that are invoiced for, but unfortunately, that's part of the integrity commissioner role in the organization.
Councillor Adams.
So whether it's in camera or closed, I hope we can be informed of what's going on with the complaint ahead of time. I think that's kind of within our code of conduct as well, that we can be informed. That's it.
Thank you, everyone. With that, we'll move over to Mr. Adair, who can speak to protective services.
Thank you, Keith. Through you to council. As you can see from this slide, it includes the fire department and the police department. The revenues are usually consistent from year to year. The increase in expenditures for 2019 was due to the firefighter retro payment. And the increase in the budget from 2020, well, over the increase from 2019 to 2020 is due to the increase in firefighter wages due to the settlement they received. Is there any questions from anybody?
Thank you, Mr. Adair.
Thank you.
We can turn it over to Mr. Riverty.
Thank you, Keith. Through you, your worship, to council. As you well know, Public Works Department deals with road maintenance, sidewalks, street lights, storm drain, guardrail, and so on. Revenues decrease over the years, primarily due to elimination of internal charges for equipment. The cost increase over 2019 actuals is usually due for labor costs within winter controls, which is a variable, and the gaps that we do have from staffing. There was a retirement for manager for infrastructure last year, and now we're budgeting for a waterworks manager. And my position was filled as general manager of Public Works. Also, we carried some work that was not completed last year to this year. Eliminating the engineering department has increased our budget to 50,000, I believe. We're planning to do some culvert replacements. There's 3 major culverts we're looking at. That's included in our operations budget. Looking at replacing some control panels for traffic lights that needs to be replaced. We have a fair amount of signs that's been missing throughout the town, so we are looking at replacing some of those. So we're looking at some staff training, repairing sidewalks with ductile plates, audible pedestrian signals. Also, we're looking at removing 5 signs for MTO, which is they're ours, but they have to be removed from the right of way of Highway 66.
I have a quick question while you're on topic, sir.
Go ahead, Councillor Owens.
The audible signals downtown, while you were on that, are they functioning right now?
Yes, they are.
Sounds more like some of them sound more like Morse code than anything else. Like, is this normal, or do they have to be upgraded a bit or adjusted?
We need to review the program that was put in place. So we've collected some information from suppliers and so on. So we need to look at what it can do and can't do. It's mostly a programming issue at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Councillor Adams.
Yes, through your worship. So for Public Works, we discussed in the pretty much winter near the end of last year about how it was going. And we discussed maybe doing contracted routes for some of them to help save the costs of equipment and such forth. Does this budget reflect implementing some of that?
Not at this point, no. But we can, for 2020, we would be looking at that. 21, sorry.
Thank you.
Hello,
Councillor Perrier.
I didn't think anybody saw me over here.
We didn't.
Mr. Rivety, I'm just looking at, I maybe in the wrong area I'm looking, but it says capital expenditures. Is this, it's about 837,000. Is this part of the jobs you just finished mentioning? All these sign replacements and road repair and all that, or is that a separate budget?
Which amount was that? Sorry.
Like the sign replacements that you were just talking about there,
Yeah,
in the fixing of the roads and that, is that separate from capital expenditures, or is that, because this is an awful big number there and I'm looking at, and I was just wondering what that all is.
in true operation signage, we've had $7,000. We had to increase it to 15,000, I believe. There's a lot of stolen signs within the town limits.
If I could just jump in. Sorry, Dennis.
How
or
about
Mr.
this?
Ferrier.
I'm
If I can
sorry, yeah,
just
but I don't think I'm getting my question across properly. I might, like I said, I might be a little bit ahead of the game. It says capital expenditures. I realize we're in public works, but it says all other projects, 837. I'm just wondering if these projects you were just talking about that have to get done, is that part of that 837,000?
No, it wouldn't be. It
Wouldn't be, okay. That's a whole different ballgame.
If I may interrupt, that 837 includes McCamus Avenue and Lakeshore. Is that correct?
Oh, okay.
Mike, do I have that correct?
Yeah, Lake Shore, I believe it was about $181,000, and that was in capitals.
Yeah, I just want a quick question on that. I realize we're not going through capital again. Lakeshore, it's paving basically, because I thought we had done the in-ground infrastructure 6-7 years ago, but never got around to paving it. I know these people on that street will be very, very happy that with a lot of complaints about dust. Am I correct in saying it's paving for Lakeshore?
Yes, you're correct. It's paving for Lake Shore.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further questions in regards to Public Works, we'll turn it over to Ms. Lynch, who can speak to TPR.
Thank you, Mr. Gorman, through your worship to council. As you can see, our revenues have been increasing year over year. This is primarily due to an increased CMI, which drives our funding. This year in particular, we have additional funding from the province for COVID. The costs that have been increasing over 2019, we have had increased staffing costs, and this is from overtime and sick time. We've had a tremendous amount of sick time, and that is because of the COVID screening. If any of our employees have one symptom, they cannot come to work. And it's been a big burden on trying to replace those shifts. So it's resulted in a lot of overtime. We also have had some increased contractor services. Let me mention that historically, the dietary manager was an employee of Tech Pioneer. Last year, that person left our employment and we contracted that position out. Last year it was part of a year, this year it's the entire year. So that's the reason for that increase. And then the increase to materials is due to COVID. It is partially funded. How long that's going to go on is an unknown. I would think at least for the summer.
I would say,
I'd be happy
Nancy,
to take.
yeah, sorry, Nancy, to cut in, Mayor Pat here. After the announcement that the province and the feds received today about all the issues in the nursing homes and retirement homes, it's been a wake-up call. So I can't see them, being able to forget about increasing the funding for your area of service. It's long overdue. So hopefully that does come through, even though it'll be a bonus if it does at this point.
That is our hope.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Loach. So sort of just to walk back through quickly and touch on that increase that we're looking at. Accumulated across all those service areas, we're talking about $500,000 or 2%. And then as you can see on this waterfall chart, it sort of shows you the areas we're going high and going low. We're seeing savings versus 2019.
Keith, sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you again. I
Okay,
must be
well,
getting old.
No, it's probably me, Counselor. So walking through just quickly, reiterating that change year over year. Now, when we're looking at general government, largely the labor aspect, integrity commissioner, and then estimates around audit and legal. When we're looking at public works, labor, again, we've noted those staffing gaps. So Michelle was budgeted as if it's a full complement, not people in partial positions and vacancies and such. When we're looking at development services, we did see a big uptick on bylaw enforcement given last year where there was large gaps in it. As far as TPR, as Nancy touched on just 2 minutes ago, sick time, overtime, really pushing it up. When we look at community services, obviously we're seeing savings, largely due to that loan that's been cleared year over year. And then the savings that were noted by temporarily closing the facility, whether they be materials for summer camps, chemicals for the pool, or part-time labor. And then in the protective services, obviously the biggest change year over year is the decrease tied to that retro pay. The one lump sum that we did see land in 2019, where it was quite substantial. Obviously, not a recurring thing. So outside of those sort of main branches of our operations, we do have other operating expenses. And these are the ones that I sort of say are a little less controlled. They're outside of our realm of control. These are payments to DSAP, whether it be social services, for ambulances and that sort of thing, to Michigan Health Unit. And then it also includes expenditures related to the tax bill, including cost for impact and tax relief. Just to reiterate the capital, it was a very beneficial meeting that we had several weeks back. When we went and we cleared through everything, we landed at $6.1 million. I think the thing here is obviously, again, it was shaped by several significant projects. So the size and scope was quite large, but the number of projects, were really tied to a handful. It should be noted that some of those projects are still conditional on receiving funding approval. And this is just a quick way to reiterate. So as we're looking at those key projects, and these are important for us, to deliver on. We've sat and we felt very comfortable that we could proceed and get and procure any of these items and, successfully embark on these projects. So this is just a reiteration of that 80-20. So when you're looking at a cost perspective on $6 million, it's largely driven by these handful of projects or gear that needs to be procured. So you're looking at more than 80% of the items just by this one cost base per se. Just to touch briefly on water and wastewater.
Your worship,
Yes,
this
go
is
ahead.
where I'm declaring pecuniary interest.
Yes.
So water and wastewater amounts, as we touched on at the start of the presentation, revenues include the 2% that was previously passed at council. Okay. So the revenues include the 2% increase. We did not need or require an additional increase. So we've held everything else consistent as far as consumption on metered rates and everything else. As far as labor, consistent staffing wise, but budget as if it's a full complement and we didn't leave those gaps. Within here, we do have monies going into transfers. Not quite to the level on water that we did see in 2019. But as I sort of alluded to, we did have some savings in labor that we expect to see come through this year and actually staff up those positions. And so both budgets do have monies going into the reserves to help build them up and help partake on some of those significant projects going forward. Is there any questions that people have? We can go back or we can delve into some deeper details. If there's something that we might have missed tonight. we'll be happy to try to address it.
You see my
Treasurer,
hand, Pat?
no, don't see
I'm
it
not
at
sure if
all.
I'm on your screen or not, so. But
Okay, there you are.
I do have a question. With the CAT scan now at the hospital, I notice you still have an increase in ambulance cost, and I'm just wondering if CAT scans are being done in Kirkland Lake, then why are we increasing costs for ambulance? Because that's, I think a lot of those costs were transports to Liskeard and Timmins for CAT scans. I'm just curious. It's a 9% increase.
Perhaps I can answer that question, Councillor Ivanov. When DSAB did the budget, which covers that area, there was some savings from that aspect of it, but the last 4 or 5 years, their expenses have rather than taking a big increase on the DSAB portion to the municipalities, we took money out of the reserve. The reserves are still healthy, but they have a mandate to maintain it at a certain level. So this year, the board decided not to take any money out of the reserve to supplement the overall operating budget. So I think that accounts for some of that eating up some of those savings as you mentioned.
Well, I'm thinking there should be like $100,000 in savings, not like, I mean, that's got to be substantial, because that trip to Timmins with 2 people in an ambulance and an ambulance drive there and back, and they were doing that 3 and 4 or 5 times a day in Timmins on a regular basis. It just sounds like there should be substantial savings there for DSAP.
Councillor Adams may help me out here, but I believe at the DSAP board, there's a couple $100,000 came out of reserve to supplement the budget, if I remember correctly.
Yep, we did take some from the reserve. We went below the required what's expected. So basically on that, what we can do to not have a significant increase to the municipalities is change the policy to lower the expectation of what's to be done. I believe there was an ambulance as well that was purchased just to help with the rotation of going outside of the district, since the district is pretty much from New Liskeard to Goganda to Virginia Town. Pretty significant.
Hopefully that answers part of your question, Councillor Ivanov. I know it doesn't.
I'm still confused, but, and are they getting rid of some properties in Kirkland Lake? Social housing I'm talking about, they're selling them, aren't they?
I think Councillor Adams can expand on that, but I don't believe there's that many additional that they're talking about. Go ahead, Councillor Adams.
Yeah, so they are mandated to have so many properties within the district. So if they're selling the ones in Kirkland, it's because they built new 4 residences in Timiskaming Shores. So what they're selling in Kirkland is to keep the minimum standard and move it down to Timiskaming Shores.
And actually, it wasn't reported to this council, but I know in the last council, the percentage of low-income housing for Kirkland Lake in particular was close to 5%, and the provincial average was about 3%. So we certainly, although there's always a strong demand, we do have a lot of units, and that's what ended up happening, like Councillor Adams said, as far as repositioning them into, some of them into Timiskaming Shores. I think Councillor Perry had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to say in regards to Councillor Eugene, sometimes I know I've been going for CAT scans, and I used to always go to Liskeard. And if you don't tell them that you want to go to Kirkland, they'll just continue booking you in Liskeard. So maybe that's causing some of them to still go up there. They don't know that they can change, maybe, So maybe the word should be out there. You can go to Kirkland They got to inform their doctor, look, we got a CAT scan here now. I want to go to Kirkland. Just a thought, you know.
Councillor Owen.
Yeah, this budget is based on a proposed structure for the town. And it's a structure that we have not, the council has not approved, which causes me concern because it makes me feel like we're almost getting locked into something before we've had a discussion about, a full discussion about it. If this new structure is changed in a minor way or a major way by council, will that affect this budget?
Through you, Your Worship, to council. In these cases, we've actually budgeted isolated from department to department. So for instance, animal control has its own distinct budget. It's just which grouping we would move it within. So if there was no desire to bring it into development services and it was to reside in protective services, which is where it does within the FIR, I would just effectively transfer over dollars from one bucket to the other. It would be a similar story with cemetery. Rather than being within community services, cemetery dollars would flow over to another bucket, line for line.
Okay, thanks, Keith.
Councillor Owen.
The other thing I noticed in this budget is a lot of increase in the columns administration and other. And it's not just one department. It seems to be a pretty broad trend. And I'd just like an explanation as to why all of a sudden we're spending all this extra money on administration. If I could have that, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to council. In this case with administration, what we've tried to do is group like items. So I'm trying to take your travel costs, your telephone and that kind of thing, and group them into one comparative. We have closed off a lot of historical accounts. And so from year to year, you're not going to see consistency in those, hence those groupings. Should we want to go into greater detail, you'll start to get sort of some of the visual of the structure and the challenges we've got in particular on that system. So earlier in the presentation, I jumped over to Questica. Within there, you can go and you can basically see which accounts make up administration. So if we're looking at a grouping like admin and other, you'll be able to get a feel for what's within that bucket. So, and you can literally see right down to which department you'd like to see to get a feel for each of those respective increases. But if you'd like, I can prepare a quick summary, sort of change over change if you need to.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Mr. Gorman. I'm just thinking as in terms as a ratepayer looking at this proposed budget, and I see all these increases in administration. I think we need to really explain this to the residents of Kirkland Lake fully, because it looks like we're adding, to me, a non-financial person just looking at the titles. It looks to me like we're adding all these jobs in administration and building a bigger bureaucracy. So I just put that request in that when we approve the budget and do a final presentation, that we make it clear that is not the reason for the increases, and explain what the reasons are. I think it's important that the residents of Kirkland Lake know this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Owen. That's noted. We can definitely provide some clarity on those areas, for sure, especially within admin. Like I said, the biggest change there would be gaps in positions year over year, and sort of the way we historically budgeted or settled costs. But we can definitely provide a bit more clarity when we finalize the presentation.
So do you, sorry, Councillor White?
Yeah, sorry, Keith, do we have a running total on projects carried forward? I know there was a lot of different things carried forward, and I'm sure we could tally it, but I was just wondering if you had a complete total that you could give to us.
Carry forward from 2019.
Yeah.
I'd have to just see if I can pull it up quick. I'll send that out after.
Okay.
It was in the
Yeah,
range
that's
of 1
perfect.
million. It was in
Okay.
the range of $1 million though.
Okay.
It's just I'm
Perfect.
not at my desktop, so I can't.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Thanks.
Councillor Adams?
Yeah, I just want to say what a great job you've done, Keith, with this budget. To have come into this meeting 2 weeks ago with a proposed 13% levy increase and to hold it at the consumer price index. I just want to say great job. Certainly that's something that can be reasonable to the taxpayers as rate of inflation is real and wages go up, hydro goes up every year. So that's good. Good job.
Councillor Ivanov?
Yeah, and the presentation is terrific. It's nice to look at something you can actually understand, and it's consistent all the way through. We can all look at it. I know online it's going to be easy for our taxpayers to have a look at this and easily see where the increases are. I know that there's been some rejiggling of the numbers in order to get them in the proper departments, and that's some of the reason that there's been some big differences. But you know, as Councillor Adams says, you know, looking at this with a cost of living, you know, who can argue that? And water rates not going up for the second half of the year, as Councillor Adams was opposed to at the beginning of the year. This is great that we've got, at least we've got to status quo for this part of the year. I think everybody's looking, after last year, everybody's looking for a bit of a break, and this certainly is a bit of a break.
Treasurer Gorman, if I may add, I'm not going to go into any detail, but we did have a board meeting for the Kirk Lake Solar Project. We will not be receiving any disbursements this year. There isn't a full year of operation, but quite honestly, it's trending for the roughly 7 or 8 months it was running at about 106% of the budgeted projections. So it's right on target or a little bit better. We should be able to see some funds dispersed back to the community for next year. And perhaps that will present an opportunity for us to, without increasing the tax levy, to build up some of our reserves, because we've used up a portion this year. We're certainly, there's room to add for future needs. So I just wanted to clarify to the rest of council that what's happening with Kirkland Lake and Cap Solar. Councillor Owen?
Yeah, just one question on that. Would it not be customary to receive quarterly payments? I mean, that's how most businesses operate, on quarterly statements. Is that not so? If we've been operating for 9 months, shouldn't we have received some revenue from that?
I'll let Keith expand on that, but there are revenues, but the startup costs are significant in the first year of any business operation. We can get you a copy of the financial statements.
Good.
They're projecting at least where they should be, and a little bit better. I don't think we're going to get quarterly disbursements because, but I'll let Keith expand on that.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to council. As Mayor, we have some draft statements. They were in a loss position for 2019, and cash position wasn't significant at the timing of our meeting, as they had paid back some loans. I think the intent behind that organization was to build up some levels of cash. because of bank covenants that specified that they had to have so many months of payments within that bank balance. So I think there's some hesitation to release monies until they have that appropriate cushion to cover so many months so they can honor the terms of the loan.
Yeah, if I may add, Treasurer Gorman, there was approximately 300,000 in amortization or depreciation expensed out, which is not a cash outlay. So, though it ends up showing up from a financial standpoint, a loss, from a cash flow standpoint, it's doing reasonably well, or a little better than expected. But from an accounting process and for tax reasons, we can carry forward that loss.
I think the expectation is we'll have them come in for a presentation with the results. And we have indicated that we desire quarterly reporting out of them that would extend to a set of financial statements. But we've also tasked them that there'll be quarterly board meetings.
Councillor Owen?
Yeah, the reason I brought that up was because I get asked a lot about that is, are we getting any revenues? I know that a lot of people I talk to, they're very frustrated with the fact that it took so long to get here. It was so many years, 2 years behind schedule. And now that it's up and operating, myself, as well as many residents, thought that we would be getting payback on it. And so it's hard to explain to them that it's up and running and we're still not getting any payback on it. So that's why I raised that, just to let you know. Thank you.
I think, if I may add, Treasurer Gorman, the fact that we've changed or about to change the accounting function to the same accounting firm that looks after the town of Kirkland Lake, we will have better reporting and more timely reporting than we have had over the past year and a half or so. But I think that was one of the things that at the board meeting that we wanted to accomplish, and we did. So, excuse me. So to your comments, Councillor Owens, I agree. I think you will find the reporting will be more consistent and in a timely fashion. But at this point, we didn't want to drain the bank account. There's always some surprises coming up, so it wouldn't be a sound business decision to dish out a bunch of dividends at this point. We should be back on a regular dividend process starting in 2021. And I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, Treasurer Gorman, the dividends would be paid at the end of the year, but we would know in sufficient time that will help us with our budget process. So this year we didn't have anything to budget because we didn't even know exactly, as you clearly indicated, the numbers weren't available. But I want to bring you up to date on what's happening with it, because I think your comments are correct, Councilor Owen. People are wondering what's happening with it. It's up and running. When are we going to start seeing some cash flow for the community? So it's coming. So any further questions or comments? I echo the same comments as Councillor Ivanoff and Councillor Adams, and I'm sure the rest of Council, Treasurer Gorman and the senior management team for putting this budget together. We asked for a lot, and you delivered. So much appreciated. And the process, reporting process, presentation is a lot easier to follow, as Councillor Ivanoff said. So just to clarify, Keith, if you would, Where do we go from here so the public knows and as well as council?
Maybe I'll jump in, Your Worship. Thank you through you to council. Everyone echoes the kind words of council. Mr. Gorman has led an incredible process and the team has rallied around him to make this possible. The good news is that if council is happy with this budget, the recommendation as presented will provide direction to staff to issue notice for the presentation and preparation of the approval of the budget and the presentation of the tax rate bylaw at the June 16th council meeting. The bad news is, Your Worship, is that we're going to give you a couple months off and start the 2021 budget process in August, September. So
Perfect.
it's going to be a year of budget. And we're pretty pleased that in spite of a very challenging year facing COVID, everyone has done a remarkable job. And I have to be honest, Your Worship, in speaking to many of my colleagues around the province and management speaking to their colleagues, I think Kirkland Lake has probably done more during the COVID than any other municipality in the province. So kudos to council and staff for taking lemons and making lemonade in this process and hopefully advancing the services to the people of Kirkland Lake in the best possible way that we could. So thank you to everybody involved, Your Worship, and staff recommendation would be the motion as printed, and we will prepare for the June 16th council meeting if that would be council's wish.
Thank you for those kind words. Rick, I have to agree with you. When times get tough, that's when Kirkland pulls together. So kudos to all the staff and senior management team for putting this budget together that we can live with for sure. Councillor Ivanov.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on TPR because I know that after hearing the news today and how badly some seniors are being treated in other nursing homes, I know I sit on the board. I know we listen to complaints. I know we listen to whatever's happening there. We've visited the home. I want to assure people that TPR does not run that way, and that I want to congratulate Nancy on the way she does operate that place and the ethical way that is run as a home for people that deserve some empathy and some loving from staff and from the residents of Kirkland Lake.
Thank you, Councillor Ivanov. Well said. I think we all agree. Any further comments or questions? Go to the motion.
A motion moved by Casey Owen, seconded by Stacy White. Be it resolved that memorandum number 2020-FIN-003 entitled Proposed 2020 Annual Budget Report and Presentation be received. That the 2020 consolidated budget, including capital works in the amount of $6.136 million, be recommended to council for approval at the June 16th, 2020 regular meeting of council as presented by staff, including an overall tax levy increase consistent with the consumer price index of 2.2% to the average assessed residential property in the town of Kirkland Lake. That staff be directed to issue notice in accordance with the notification bylaw that council will consider the adoption of the proposed 2020 consolidated estimate of revenues and expenditures for the town of Kirkland Lake at the June 16th, 2020 regular meeting of council, and that staff be directed to prepare and present a tax rate bylaw to authorize the collection of the final 2020 billings for presentation to council at the June 16th, 2020 regular meeting of council.
All in favor? Motion carried, unanimous. Confirmation bylaw.
I have a motion moved by Rick Owen, seconded by Dennis Terrier. Be it resolved that the following bylaw be read a first, second, and third time, numbered, passed, signed by the mayor and the clerk, and the seal of the corporation be affixed thereto. Bylaw number 20-048, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council at its meeting held May 26, 2020.
All in favor? Motion carried, adjourned.
Motion moved by Stacy White, seconded by Patrick Adams. Be it resolved that council adjourn the May 26, 2020 special meeting of council.
All in favor? Motion carried, adjournment taking place. Thank you.